minutes, but it's close enough. All right. So here we go. Also, I didn't quite eat, but as I do on my weekday morning show, I'm going to just, as I'm watching and gathering thoughts, God, this is the most inconsistent trilogy ever. All right, so my thoughts before we go into this. First and foremost, welcome to the Associated Guests Sunday edition. This is going to be something that I'm going to be getting into. Some lore dives, and as well, the lore dives will lead up to me saying what I would do to fix the sequel trilogy. That's the plan. Whether or not I have the mental fortitude to do so, we'll see. But that being said, welcome to the show. I am Alfie Animus. If I haven't said that already, it's been a weird morning. But yeah, welcome to the show here at the Bear in Mind channel. We're gonna get into this right now. But basically, we're gonna watch this. We're gonna do some lore build-ups. I'm gonna look up a few key characters from what I would use or would have used in the sequel trilogy, which apparently is similar to what George Lucas would have used. I got the idea from not only am I a fan of some of the books, but I'm a fan of, I think, Bandit Incorporated or something like that. Did a video 7-8 years ago about how he would have fixed the prequel trilogy. He made that right after Force Awakens came out, I want to say. But yeah, the sequels, if nothing else you need to know about these, that if you haven't seen them for whatever reason, the titles are probably the worst in the series, franchise, whatever. But my biggest thing before we get into it is, look, everyone always complains that the episode, the Star Wars episodic movies are all about the Skywalkers. And I'm like, that's how it works. The episodes 1 through 9, or however many episodes they decide to do, that's the Skywalker saga. Now, should they make non-Skywalker based or directly linked Skywalker based movies? Sure, whatever, or even Disney Plus shows. They could divide it that way. But if they're the episodics, the prequels, the original trilogy, the sequel trilogy, it should all be based on Skywalkers, not just someone who becomes a Skywalker. That was always my main holdback on this. You're still talking about people in there, but because you take him out of the movies, and don't even get me started on how they did old poor Finn on this, but we'll get into that as we go. Let's start the video. Enough jaw-jacking. I think it's given people enough time to get in here.
The most divisive, controversial, and disappointing cinematic trilogies of all time. No trilogy from memory has ever managed to generate so much hype, so much pandemonium, just a complete takeover of the pop culture zeitgeist like the sequel trilogy managed to do. Billions of dollars at the box office, the domestic box office record which still stands to this day, and levels of relevance that the IP realistically hadn't seen in nearly 40 years. But within the space of a few years, it all managed to nosedive to a point where people just didn't care anymore. Between 2015 to 2019, Star Wars went...
He looked awful in that. He looked a lot like Marlon Brando in The Island of Dr. Giro in the 90s. That's how silly he looked to me.
From being a juggernaut to a laughingstock. After so much promise and a complete hijacking of the pop culture zeitgeist for a few years, everything changed. The sequel trilogy completely derailed for a multitude of reasons. The promise of a compelling mystery and reintroduction to George Lucas's beloved creation for a new generation was set for greatness. But it all imploded in on itself in spectacular fashion. And I find it endlessly entertaining how things managed to fail so spectacularly. Now, I've talked about Star Wars on my channel before.
And again, the main reason for this is they didn't go in with a plan. Say what you want about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. For at least most of the first 3 phases, The first one completely thought out. Originally, the Hulk was going to be the bad guy for the first one. That's why they had that weird cameo from Robert Downey Jr. with General Ross at the end of the Incredible Hulk movie. Then they changed their mind, switched it to Loki because he was the only thing that anyone cared about from the Thor movie. Phase 2 was a bit lackluster. Had the least amount of good movies. I think the only good movies it had was Guardians of the Galaxy, Winter Soldier. That might have been it. But they needed a plan, and they had a plan on that. Phase 1 especially, and Phase 3 even more so. Well, I guess that makes sense. Phase 1 and 3 especially, you could see the plan structure. It had its little, chinks in the armor and whatnot, but a plan altogether, and it came together pretty nicely, at least better than we've seen consistency wise in a movie form. You've never had 19 movies directly connected to each other ever, and they were well done, whether it's your cup of tea or not. Star Wars didn't have that, which is funny considering that they ended up in the same hands. George Lucas had his treatments. They went into it with the master of starting and never finishing, Jar Jar Abrams, and the master of ruining franchises for his own personal gain, which seems contradictory, but they always do really, really well. But the merchandise doesn't, because the fan base is just there for the light show for the most part. Lens flare. And then Rian Johnson, who is a good filmmaker. Let's be honest. He is a good filmmaker. Brick was an incredible movie. At least it was when I was young and I watched it. Looper was pretty good. The first Knives Out movie was pretty good. The other ones were, sequel schlock. But entertaining. And he's a very good storyteller, except for Star Wars, let's be honest. But putting him in the middle, the master of pissing off half the people, and I respect that when it comes to filmmaking. I'm fine with that. I'm the kind of guy who likes movies like Rules of Attraction and Rian Johnson movies. But it doesn't belong in Star Wars, especially in the middle of a trilogy. Come on. There needed to be a plan. J.J. Abrams didn't think of this. Disney apparently didn't think of this. The only thing that they ever made that was pretty good was Rogue One, but we'll get into that here in a little bit. I'll let the video actually play. Sorry.
However, I have never made a video dedicated on the sequel trilogy itself. When the clocks turned over in 2025 a couple months ago, it actually hit me that it had been basically 5 years since I'd seen any of the sequels. Reason being, I absolutely grew to despise them.
Yeah,
so because
awful.
I hate myself, I wanted to revisit them to see if I felt any different after all this time. And I've got to say, I was surprised by how I felt about this trilogy. One of the 3 films in particular, I had a drastic change in opinion. So drastic, in fact, I decided to make this video. So make sure you watch all the way through.
I do too. And let's face it, okay? The Force Awakens by itself was a decent start, okay? But looking back at it, no respect. They dicked us around on Finn. The Last Jedi, a much better movie than the Rise of Skywalker, which stupid name, stupid movie. This one tried to correct for this one while also trying not to piss these people off as much as possible. It was the safest movie ever. This is the ultimate example, The Rise of Skywalker, of if you try to make everybody happy, you'll piss everyone off, or whatever that old saying is. But in hindsight, they're all bad. They all are. God.
So in this video, we're going to revisit the sequel trilogy. We're going to go film by film, taking a trip down memory lane and getting to the bottom of what the hell went wrong, what went right, and how a trilogy that had the world
Bad
at its
planning
feet
and
managed to
modern
turn
audiences,
into a laughing stock. This is going to be a really long video, so sit back, relax as we take a retrospective look at the Star Wars sequels in 2025. On October 30th, 2012, Star Wars changed forever. George Lucas signed Lucasfilm over to Disney for $4 billion in that now infamous video. It's just one of the toughest things to watch given how far Star Wars has fallen. And Disney, being Disney, wasted no time once acquiring the rights to Lucasfilm to get a new Star Wars trilogy in development. Star Wars was going to be hitting theaters once again for a whole new generation, a trilogy that promised to unite Star Wars fans both young and old. To return to the franchise roots of the original trilogy,
I will say, people have a lot more respect for the prequels now.
And stray away a little bit from the style of the prequels. As, believe it or not, the general consensus of the prequels back in 2015 was significantly more negative than it is now in 2025. It was revealed...
Not 100% true. Anyone who's seen Clone Wars, both of the Clone Wars series, the Cartoon Network one, and then the official Star Wars one, anyone who's seen the Clone Wars has a great respect for the prequel trilogy because they fleshed out those characters in that series. If you haven't seen it, definitely give it a watch. Even the section after Disney took over, it's fantastic.
Revealed that the film would be called The Force Awakens, a fitting title, and would be directed by J.J. Abrams. And when that first trailer released in November 2014, I, like many people, were absolutely sold on this new trilogy. Star Wars was back, and it was front and center in the pop culture zeitgeist once again, proving before the film had even released just how strong the Star Wars name still was around the world. In December of 2015, The Force Awakens released to very strong reviews from both critics and fans. The film was dominating the box office, it was shattering records, crossing over $2 billion and setting a new domestic box office record, which, as I said earlier, still has never been topped. I remember this time very well. There was simply no better time to be a Star Wars fan after The Force Awakens release. Star Wars hysteria was at a high it hadn't seen since the release of the original trilogy almost 40 years prior. Theories were everywhere and speculation fueled the fandom, and Disney truly could not have got things off to a better start. Now, was The Force Awakens a perfect movie? No, it was very much so a modern rehash of A New Hope, which was just about the main criticism the detractors of the movie had. But most people weren't really overly bothered by that because The Force Awakens did it pretty well and added a few new twists and turns that had people wondering where things would go.
Everyone wanted... Look, I don't care. I don't have any respect for the actor that plays Finn after some of the things that he said. Because at first he was right. Disney screwed over his character 100%. And we'll get more into it as he explains to the next episodes in this trilogy. But nobody was upset when they saw Finn with that lightsaber in the previews. Nobody except for maybe Nick Fuentes. But no one knows because I don't think he was around back then. Was upset by there being a black Jedi main character. People were still cool when it turned out to be Daisy Ridley's movie. And people were still optimistic, even in the third movie, and hoping for a payoff for him being decent with the lightsaber, very lucky, and when he was sinking into the earth when they thought they were going to die, the thing that he wanted to tell Rey was that he was force sensitive. He could use the force. If it was made now, it would be a lot like Stranger Things season 5, where he would just say that he's gay. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's in everything. My God, it was a bit much.
Next, The Force Awakens managed to ease us back into the Star Wars universe. Bringing back John Williams to compose the film definitely helped with this.
Yes, it did.
But not only was there a new cast of characters for a whole new generation to latch onto, but the nostalgia.
And as far as the casting, fantastic casting. Daisy Ridley, perfect for a Star Wars movie. I don't care about his name because he's pissed me off so much, but Finn's actor, he's a good actor. What's his Moon Knight? Oscar Isaac, fantastic actor. Um, oh, the guy with the nose and the weird muscles. Adam Driver, uh, fantastic actor. John Boyega, I know his name. Okay, it's not racist. But he's just a dick, and no one else has said that much. Daisy Ridley said a little bit recently, but I'm sure Kathleen Kennedy had a lot to do with that. And again, Kelly Marie Tran, I don't think she's a great actress. I've seen her in, I think, one other thing. She wasn't great in this, but I don't hate her. Like, all the hate that she got on Twitter to the point where she had to quit social media was awful. You should never blame the actors for their jobs unless they're gaping anuses like the girl from The Acolyte. I mean, I'll never understand how someone can put out so much negativity and be surprised when they get negativity back.
It was strong with this film too. Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, and Carrie Fisher all reprised their roles as their iconic characters, with even Anthony Daniels returning as C-3PO and Peter Mayhew returning as Chewie. They managed to find a perfect balance of new and old to unite Star Wars fans for once, and they generally managed to do it pretty well. Now, it might sound like I'm erring on the side of severe positivity here so far when I've already made it clear that I absolutely hate this trilogy, but the thing is, people love to...
I don't hate it. It had good parts. It had things that were... They had a lot of potential. Again, with the cast especially, a lot of potential there. Bringing back the old cast, a lot of potential. John Williams doing the score, a lot of potential. Some of the designs, a lot of potential. I think next week I'm going to do a video, or at some point I'm going to do a video. I might even do it on New Year's Day. About... oh, shit. George Lucas. I'm sorry. I don't know. About George Lucas's original treatments. Apparently they've been leaked. And I'm going to use that for a future project.
Rewrite history and act like the general consensus wasn't overly positive when this film came out. Regardless of where the trilogy ended up and how much things deteriorated by its conclusion, The Force Awakens was received extremely well and was deemed an overwhelming success both critically and financially on all metrics. I have seen many people since the release of The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker try and act like everyone hated this movie when it came out from the get-go, which is obviously just not true. As I said, people love to rewrite history, and people have been doing it for a while with the sequels. I'm not going to do that.
Again, there are people who hated this, 100%. There are people who hated this from the get-go. Whether it be racist, whether it be sexist, those people exist, okay? But as far as the fandom goes, that is not the fandom. The fandom was excited to get anything. And then after this, or it might have been right before it came out, we found out that we were losing the 1313 game, which I think was a Boba Fett game that was coming out. People were waiting for it, and I really hope they still release it. I think it would get a good response, especially on modern hardware. But there were a lot of games. There was the Force Unleashed Part 3 was supposed to come out, and it was supposed to be a lot better than the sequel, thank God. But there was a lot of stuff that got canceled. They moved all of the expanded universe into Legacy, which is fine. But again, it's there, and they should have used the stories surrounding Han, Luke, and Leia's kids for the sequel trilogy, or even some of the Thrawn stuff. But they moved the Thrawn situation up to the beginning part of the Empire pre-Episode 4. So whatever, that's fine. It works well for Ezra, I guess. And they still have hinted towards using that. If they put Favreau in charge of Lucasfilm, we might have gotten it, but who's to say anymore, really?
I'm aware of what reality was back when this film came out, and I'm not going to pretend like it was the inverse just because of how far things fell off with episodes 8 and 9. But let's turn our focus to the analysis of the movie itself and step away from the external conversation. The Force Awakens, I believe, is still to this day the best of the sequel trilogy by a mile. Reason being, it
And that was an awesome scene. And the reason Finn and Ray stood up to him was, one, he was toying with them, and two, he was very injured by a bowcaster, which normally sends people flying, and he was trying to hold himself together, basically.
it doesn't do a whole lot wrong. As I said, it plays it safe and it keeps it almost beat for beat with A New Hope. You've got the little guy going up against the big guy, our hero coming from a sand planet, the mentor figure coming and going, trench runs and killing the planet-sized weapon. It's not shy in its attempts to run clear parallels with A New Hope. And you know, A New Hope is a great movie, so this never really bothered me. Keep in mind, this film's job was to ease us back into Star Wars after
That
what
was a
had
nice
been
touch,
a pretty
too. I'm not going to lie. The
turbulent
three
period.
fingers on the face.
And I thought when it
One, it lets us know who he is. It's like, oh, there he is. And two, it was just a really good scene.
did stray away from what came before, it was extremely interesting. J.J. Abrams' mystery box storytelling is kind of the best and worst thing about this movie. The
It really
mystery
is.
inserted here is excellent in isolation.
It's great because he sets up a lot of questions to get you interested in the series. It sucks because when he comes up with these questions, he has no answers. Most people write their stories around what those answers are or could be. You see it with a little bit with Tolkien. You see it a lot with J.K. Rowling. And you see it a lot with George R.R. Martin. George R.R. Martin, at least seemingly so, is great at it, but now he's so scared to release his final book because of the backlash of the end of the series that we probably won't ever get it. I'm not going to lie.
But in the context of the trilogy, it was almost impossible to pay off in a satisfying way, especially when you're dealing with multiple filmmakers in the trilogy, including one in particular that was hell-bent on retconning what came before.
Not a bad filmmaker, just bad for Star Wars with his particular type of filmmaking. It'd be like Tarantino taking over Star Wars, or Star Trek for that matter. I'm not a big fan of that idea. I am cool with him doing kind of like what Snyder did with that really shitty Star Wars ripoff that he put on Netflix. I'm cool with Tarantino doing something like that. His own style, kind of like the Orville was with Star Trek. It's Star Trek, but it's not Star Trek.
Or just not paying anything
Trek,
off
whatever.
at all. The new cast of characters, looking back on it now,
Gorgeous.
It's honestly tough to sit through The Force Awakens knowing that just about every single new character's potential was completely wasted in this trilogy. The Force
Yes, it was.
Awakens is a tough watch these days, not because it's a bad movie, but because it's so obvious how much potential was thrown down the drain with these characters.
It really was. Nothing went anywhere. Nothing.
The new trio of Rey, Finn, and Poe were all extremely interesting characters if you just look at it from this film alone. You've got Rey, the mysterious scavenger who's strong with the Force but doesn't have a clue why, hinting at potential special lineage.
She really should have either been a Skywalker. The Palpatine thing made sense because of her fighting stance and how naturally strong she was. But my God. Why? I don't blame Rian Johnson. He did what Rian Johnson does. If you give Rian Johnson anything, that's what he would have done with it. And I don't fault him for that personally, although his attitude fucking sucks. Fucking sucks. Your fan theory sucks. Fuck you, guy. But I do blame Kathleen Kennedy solely. I blame George Lucas to an extent, too, for believing her. But she had to have put on a huge front for decades for him to sign this over to her, of all people.
You've got Finn, a defected stormtrooper, which is such a great idea, something we hadn't seen before, and is also a person who insists on running from the fight, but his morals keep dragging him back into the fray. And you've got Poe Dameron, the hotshot pilot who has to rise to become a leader. This trio had so much potential, and it's clear when you revisit this movie, they had the building blocks there. It's just a shame that Rian Johnson kicked those blocks over in the next movie, but we'll get to that. So let's hone in on the characters here, starting with Rey, perhaps the most infamous Star Wars character that there is. Now, I don't even need to begin to mention why them making a Rey movie after all these years is a terrible idea.
It's not going to
Anyone
happen.
with a pulse can figure that out. Despite great
And and I would be okay with it if it was a good movie. But you know it's not going to be a good movie because of who's making it and who's pushing it, okay? Anything that Kathleen Kennedy herself announces either doesn't happen and she uses these things for leverage, but she's running out of that kind of power in the industry. And I really do feel bad for Daisy Ridley that she's kind of thrown in the middle of all this, and the rest of her career has suffered for it. Um, because she seems like a very nice person, and she's pretty, and she's good in this. Um, it's just a shame that she got caught up in the disorganization that has been the Star Wars sequel trilogy.
Potential
Disney Star
the
Wars in
damage to
general.
this character in this trilogy is basically irreversible. But man, I've got to say, the starting point for this character was interesting. I remember all the theorizing on who Rey's parents were, who was in that shuttle when she was left on Jakku, how could she beat Kylo Ren, how could she do this, how could she do that. The theorizing was fun. Now, it did become clear in the next two films that there was definitely a little bit of a sprinkle of strong female character Disney politics.
There's a whole
But the character in The Force
whole bunch of
Awakens,
that.
I don't think was inherently bad at all. Were there times, especially given the context of her contrived lineage or lack thereof, depending...
And look, real quick, there's nothing wrong with a female character who's a strong, imposing force or a role model or anything like that, okay? But the trope that has come out of strong female character, quote unquote, is ridiculous. It's horrible. It's actually bad for women. It's bad for men too, but it's bad for women. Okay? This whole it horribly reads of, those things where people put them, like, did you ever have those friends who wrote stories based off a franchise that they loved, whether it be this, Ninja Turtles, romance novels, whatever? It's literally the fan fiction of someone who didn't have a lot of people who liked them, always thought they deserved more in life, hated their life for whatever reason, and they wrote themselves into these fantasy worlds that some already exist and some they made up themselves, but they always made themselves the main character. And in doing so, did like a lot of your friends on the playground would do and be like, I have lots and lots of powers. I'm good at everything. There's nothing bad about me. I'm so cool, you guys. Cartman, come on. This is Cartman for syndrome, 100%. It's the fish sticks joke, Cartman writing. It started off, someone else did it, and then by the end, he did it, and he slayed a fucking dragon, and everyone said he was a hero and sexy and wanted, lovin's.
on the movie you're watching, where it seems like she just has all the answers and didn't encounter enough struggle before succeeding, yeah, sure. I think with this
No
movie,
struggle,
they
not
at
enough.
least
None.
tried to make things somewhat make sense.
Every time anything happens, she's like, oh, wait, I know how to do that. Try that. Oh, my God, it works. That's not how these things happen.
With how competent she is. Like when she flew the Falcon, everybody said she can't do that, shoot her or something. Like, how could she just get in it and do what Han did in the original trilogy? A lot of people...
And the rough, shaky takeoff, fine, cool, whatever. But no amount of experience just picking around in these things. Like I was a helicopter mechanic, okay, for like 8 years. I'm good at it, but if you put me in the cockpit, other than the fact that a couple of pilots let me take over while we were in the sky, but as far as landings and takeoffs, and maybe some slight maneuvering, there's no way that you can get that. And since she didn't have any pilots to help her, at least not sky pilots, they were, land for their little floaty a few inches off the ground kind of things. But you don't learn how to maneuver a ship like the Falcon through those tight corridors like she did that are just barely spaced for it. I know suspend disbelief for stuff like this, but come on. But people allowed it because we were so happy to see Star Wars for the first time in at least 10 years.
Tend to omit the fact that she's scavenged ships like this her entire life. She knows how they work. And when she first starts flying it, she basically destroys half of Nima Outpost because she clearly doesn't know how to fly it like a master straight away, like people keep making out she does. There's also the fact she beat Kylo Ren, which...
And God, just the way she holds the lightsaber. I mean, I know they were hopefully going for she doesn't know how to do anything, but she holds it so high up. Like, this isn't the worst. Later, she'll hold it to where her hands are all the way up to here, to where, I mean, if it slides a little bit, bye pointers.
Which is obviously a massive spot of contention amongst fans.
And see, she fights and lunges.
Obviously,
like
a
Emperor
massive
right
spot of contention
That's the
amongst
Emperor right
fans,
there.
and has been since this film came out. How can someone who's used the Force for one day beat someone who's significantly more powerful and trained for years? They tend to omit the fact that Kylo was shot in the stomach with a blaster that literally sent stormtroopers flying 10 feet in the air earlier in the movie.
100%.
And The Last Jedi, to its credit, did mention why and how Kylo did lose to Rey. Plus, they did make a point of Finn holding his own against him, at least for a little while, to try and make it make sense that Kylo was clearly not in a good way and probably could have been knocked over by a strong breeze that day. Like, they at least did try to make things somewhat believable, but it is clear.
But the worst thing about this is, him and Snoke are supposed to be your big bads in this in this sequel trilogy. And automatically, right there, even though he was injured, you take away a lot of what makes him scary. Darth Vader was an imposing force for the whole trilogy. The Emperor was an imposing force for the whole, well, for the for the 5th and 6th episodes. But it's just, it makes zero sense. Because and then the 8th movie, when they showed Snoke in person and then killed him, it was just like, oh, okay.
That leaps in logic had to be made to justify her competence and power. So I do think both sides of the coin, with Rey being a Mary Sue and her not being a Mary Sue, have a point with this film specifically. I'm not going to say you're wrong either way, but in the next two movies, it's pretty clearly skewed in one direction, and I don't think I need to mention which direction it is. But let's talk about Kylo Ren. He was and still is the best thing about the sequel trilogy. Now, I know there are really brain-dead people out there that love to say he's just a sad emo and are completely ignorant of any nuance this character has in this movie, because this is...
All the nuance comes from how good an actor Adam Driver is. I mean, let's be honest. I will say his character had the most potential because he was the son of characters from the original trilogy, but come on.
The best character in the trilogy by a mile, which, to be fair, I know is not saying much, but it still counts for something. The comparisons to Darth Vader were inevitable for the new villain of the sequel trilogy, and the fact they addressed that head-on by making that comparison a key aspect of his character, his ability to live up to his grandfather, was a rare great decision that this trilogy made. Like, the potential of this character was insane. Not to mention, having an actor as great as Adam Driver in the role was excellent.
Exactly.
I can't believe we had Adam Driver playing a main villain in a Star Wars trilogy, and it was fumbled. That will never not drive me insane. Now, Kylo's first appearance in The Force Awakens, I think, is criminally underrated, as it tells you everything you need to know about the character off the rip. Both Rey and Kylo's introductions do this so well. Kylo is powerful, but he's not perceived how he wants to be. During this scene, all of Kylo's lines are deliberate and demand respect. However, every line of dialogue from Max von Sydow's character completely deflects Kylo's intentions and focuses on something Kylo is clearly trying to avoid. Watch the scene back again. Just about every single line strays off topic from Kylo's dialogue and references back to who the man behind the mask is. This is a genius interaction that punches well above this trilogy's quality. The fact this character has no fear despite Kylo's forced intimidation acts as a perfect example of how Kylo as a character isn't taken seriously. He's this Darth Vader wannabe. Under the dark and scary facade of the mask is a confused and desperate imitation of his grandfather. I love that the creators decided to lean into fan comparisons by making it a cornerstone of the character. And when the movie plays with those ideas, I think that's when the small moments of brilliance this trilogy has shines through.
It really does. And I will say the helmet without the hood, kind of goofy looking.
I think for the most part, Kylo in this movie is a thumbs up. The moments where his artificial facade of Kylo Ren falls away and we see Ben Solo seep through is compelling. But it is hard to go back and watch The Force Awakens again to see a character filled with so much potential and played by such a great actor get criminally squandered. Now, as for Poe and Finn, I think these two characters are great in The Force Awakens specifically. Both fall off a cliff in the next two movies.
They had a lot of potential. A lot of potential. And for some reason, I don't know why they did this to John Boyega's character, Finn. They used him as a joke. Okay, all throughout The Last Jedi, he's a joke. But we'll get into that when we get there. And then Poe, same thing. I don't know why they do this. They feel the need to do this to most of the male characters in most of your entertainment media these days. I'm fine with doing it, taking a character down a peg or two if it serves the story, but doing it just to do it because you hate the fan base or whatever that's going on these days, it's just petty. And it really shows the kind of person a lot of the writers for modern Hollywood and such are.
Finn more so than Poe, but we'll get to that. They essentially took Han Solo from the original trilogy and cut him into two to create Poe and Finn. You have the hotshot pilot and calm and cool attitude of Han with Poe, and you have the reluctant hero turned eventual leader with Finn. As for how The Force Awakens treated the original trio, I know a lot of people over time have grown bitter on the fact that they killed Han Solo and they see it as disrespectful, but I think Han's death was handled the best out of the big three. Not to mention, Harrison Ford's been begging for this character to die for decades, and the man finally got his wish, and you don't say no to Harrison Ford. They definitely focused in on Han regressing as a smuggler and a father here, and for some people that was frustrating, but to be honest, I think this works for Han specifically. For me, it made Han a more three-dimensional character, more so than he was in the original trilogy, and I'm not saying he wasn't three-dimensional in the original trilogy or anything, don't mistake me, but I think this just made Han a better character in general, more depth. It made him feel a little bit more human, which helped with Kylo as a character as well.
I don't care. I do not care. I'm not saying that they had to be perfect people or anything, but again, making both the male characters very sad and had lost everything, and having the one female character as, the general, it's a little telling. Everyone needs flaws. The fact that Leia doesn't seem to have any for some reason, and you rest Ren's entire characterization on Han Solo being a deadbeat dad after his whole redemption arc in the original trilogy, and then turning Luke into someone who could kill his own nephew because he got a feeling when he was the one that saw all the hope. He was the epitome, the embodiment of hope in the original trilogy. It's just shitty writing. You're just appealing to modern audiences who won't like this movie anyway.
As for Leia, I think The Force Awakens handled her well. She's in line with the character she was in the original trilogy and is well respected and treated with respect by the filmmakers. As for Luke, well, we'll obviously get to that when we talk about The Last Jedi, but a large portion of this movie is how do we find Luke?
Even Mark Hamill hated what they did to him, and he's as big an SJW or whatever wokey that you can find in Hollywood. But when it comes to this, he agrees. Luke was wasted. This is not the character that Luke was or is. It shouldn't be. Him especially. Harrison Ford, I can get behind that. Him dying, whatever. But come on, dude. I know Harrison he's hated this role and has wanted Han Solo to die because he hates nerds. Fine, whatever. He's a cool dude. That's fine. But Luke.
Why did he disappear? For us to only see him right at the end. I have no problem with Luke isolating himself after a massive mistake, but I have a problem with how far they went with it in the next movie. Also, it's worth stating that the fact we didn't see Luke, Han, and Leia on screen at all in this trilogy is an absolute joke. I do not know how that happened. Now, you're probably...
It really is. And I know... Well, I was going to say something, but Han Solo died, so there should have been a scene where at least they see each other separately. But Han Solo dies before he ever knows Luke was found. Luke dies, and Leia never sees him again. It's just like, I know he did the little hologram shits, but it's sad to even think about.
Seeing by this point that I think this movie did a good job in laying the foundations for the trilogy, and that is certainly the way I feel. Is it hard enjoying The Force Awakens in retrospect, knowing that any good setup it did was wasted or just went nowhere or was retconned? Yes. Like, it is hard enjoying the idea of Snoke in this movie when he just dies and then is apparently just a creation of Palpatine. It's hard enjoying Hux as an evil fascist asshole who's going to get his comeuppance because he's the spy.
I'm the spy.
It's also hard seeing lines from Mars regarding how she got Luke's lightsaber when she says it's a good story for another time, and we're still waiting for the other time. The Force Awakens is without question the best of the sequels for me, but it is tough to revisit because you have to see all of that squandered potential all over again. Like, we were on the verge of greatness, we were this close. But ultimately, The Force Awakens is just a story.
I love how he shows scenes of people saying what he's saying, but he doesn't just play them. It's an interesting way to do things.
Of wasted potential. It's not a perfect movie, even in isolation, but what it was a great foundation for a great trilogy. But obviously, those foundations were chewed up and spat out by the next movie. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of the derailment of the sequels.
And considering we're at almost 17 minutes of the video and 41 minutes of this stream, I'm going to stop this a lot, just so you know. Maybe. I'll try not to. It's not playing. Oh my fuck.
And here we go.
The Last Jedi, one of the most infamous movies of all time. I've got to say, I actually kind of liked this movie when I walked out of the midnight.
I liked parts of it. And just like when you find out the Mandarin isn't really the Mandarin in Iron Man 3, when he throws the lightsaber over his shoulder, I mean, I chuckled. But I don't know, man. And the really shitty thing is now they're all either too old or dead to revisit this, to remake it, to redo anything. And that's the real tragedy of this whole thing.
Night screening back in 2017, but I knew this film was going to be divisive when I checked one of my group chats, and one of my friends had said that the film ruined his life and that he wanted to beat the shit out of George Lucas for allowing Disney to even
That's
make
a bit
it.
much.
And then of course I went online and I saw how split the fandom was on this movie. Now, full transparency here, I did defend this movie for a little bit after it came out. I liked that it addressed the main complaints people had about The Force Awakens and went out and did something that we hadn't seen before. I liked that it challenged what we expected, made us question our heroes. And
can I ask, do y'all remember the scene that they just showed where Rey and Ren fight Snoke's guards? What is it with Hollywood? Because they did the same thing in Game of Thrones, where they'll have the hand that's holding the knife or lightsaber or whatever, and oh no, I can't get them with this hand, and they're going to make me stab myself. And for them to just drop it into the other hand that I guess the guy fighting them forgot they had. This is something that that happens in slow motion in the two main instances that I just mentioned, and a few others. But they do it in slow motion, like it's like, oh man, I didn't think that they had another hand. Like I don't know what's happening with this. It's stupid. It's schlocky. And it's just horrible, horrible writing.
went for a non-conventional continuation. But as time
and no one ever saw those dice. I didn't know about the dice, at least. Like I wasn't a huge Star Wars fan. Like I liked it. I liked the concepts and lightsabers and shit. But I didn't really get into it until episode 3, mostly because it released on my birthday and I got to see it for free.
Went on and I watched the film more and more. I got a little older, a little bit smarter.
Can you hear the screaming?
You know, add 2 and 2 together. I slowly started to realize that challenging the viewer and subverting expectations was just not worth destroying the trilogy's potential.
Challenging the viewer, cool, whatever. Subvert expectations, sure, cool, whatever. But you're supposed to do it for things that you yourself set up. Okay? You're not supposed to just pull the rug And like I said, that's why I like Rian Johnson's films himself. He's good at setting stuff up. He's good at all these things. But when he's part of a, I don't care so much about a franchise because you can put him in some weird timeline to where it'll make sense because he'll make sure he writes it to where it makes sense. But putting him in the middle of a trilogy that wasn't planned out from the beginning, it's retarded.
So my journey with this movie has been interesting. I liked it originally, then I went on the fence and saw the good and the bad, and then I didn't watch it for 5 years, and now I have grown more cynical with this movie than I ever thought was possible. And I think that it mainly comes down to the fact of the knock-on effect this movie had on Star Wars as a whole. This was the film that led Star Wars to the irrelevant husk that it is today. Watching The Last Jedi for the first time since 2019, I have to say, I think this movie has dethroned The Rise of Skywalker as my least favorite of the three and my least favorite Star Wars film ever.
It's my least favorite just because of what it did to the momentum of the hype in the franchise. Because it killed it, full stop. This movie was so jarring, was so bad, that it caused the Solo movie to flop. And the Solo movie was also very cringe. But who are you with? Who are your people? I don't have anybody. Oh, so you're saying you're Han Solo? Roll credits.
Ever. I would go as far as to say that I actually hate this movie. If you want to know why the sequel trilogy fell apart, if you want to know why Star Wars is an irrelevant brand in 2025, if you want to know why The Rise of Skywalker was one of the most pathetic franchise films of all time, well, here's your answer. The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
Now, I do not like The Rise of Skywalker at all, but
No.
that film is merely a symptom of The Last Jedi.
Not even a symptom. It's a direct result. Okay. I see where he was going with that, but no. That movie's shittiness is a direct result of them realizing that people aren't buying what they're selling. Okay. I mean, they bought it. Oh, they bought it. But especially once Solo came out and they saw for the first time ever a Star Wars movie not only didn't sell gangbusters, not only did it not break even, it lost money at the box office. And that's before marketing.
You can hate The Rise of Skywalker for being a bad movie, and I'll agree with you, but the root cause of why The Rise of Skywalker...
And this is stupid. Okay, they did it in Stranger Things too. This last episode, stupid.
is so bad is The Last Jedi. This is the movie that made it abundantly clear that Disney had no...
Let's make this ancient-looking knife that lines up with something that fell into this ocean 20 years ago.
...plan for this trilogy at all. Rian Johnson came in and made a film that did its own thing with no care for what it actually means for anything going on around it. The films that came before, the films that will come after. It was made as if those two things weren't important, which you can't do when you're making the middle film of a trilogy. Rian Johnson had something that he wanted to do, and he was going to do it regardless of whether or not it broke canon, whether or not it lined up with any vision the trilogy had. And I don't necessarily blame Rian Johnson for wanting to draw outside the lines of Star Wars with this movie, because as someone who has...
I do. I don't blame him for being who he is, but I blame him for doing that. But I blame Kathleen Kennedy for putting someone with that reputation, albeit good movies, but that reputation in the middle movie of a trilogy. I know I've said that like 8 times during this, but my God.
Has actually made a film myself, I understand wanting to push those barriers. To be honest, I blame Kathleen Kennedy and all those involved at Lucasfilm that are in charge of taking care of the canon and the continuity of Star Wars. Because these people allowed him to do this.
Yes.
Again, I get a filmmaker wanting to do something ambitious. I understand that, but sometimes they need to be reined in, and it's clear that that didn't happen with this movie.
There's lots of examples of this, okay? George Lucas needed someone to rein him in on the prequel trilogy. Yes, that's true, but at least it was consistent and told a story. It was very boring in parts, but that's his method of filmmaking. He's the one that created this, for God's sake. But at the same time, it's better when he has directors who he trusts and he can give his honest feedback and get their honest feedback back. But that's the thing with the power dynamic. But again, the prequel trilogy, way better and at least told a solid story throughout the trilogy. Now, you can argue as to whether or not certain movies were better or worse than movies even in this trilogy. And I respect those arguments because I'm not a big fan of Attack of the Clones, especially. And oh my God, it was just bad. But anyway, I'm sorry. Let's continue.
And when you're dealing with something as connected and beloved as Star Wars, it is your duty to keep filmmakers in line on their ambitions. Rian Johnson gets the hate for this movie because he's the one who made it, which rightly so. But every single person at Lucasfilm that lacked the ability to tell him no are just as responsible for this movie and the current state of Star Wars as he is. But now to actually analyze the movie itself, I will say this probably still is the best looking Star Wars movie ever made. It's got some wonky visuals in scenes on Canto Bight, but if you can ignore the absolute blasphemy this movie is trying to pull off, you can at least enjoy the visual mastery on display. Now, that mastery obviously didn't translate to the rest of the movie. So let's just rip the band-aid off with this one, and let's talk about Luke. I've never really talked about Luke in The Last Jedi on this channel in any great detail before, so this is kind of new ground for me, and I've got a lot to say. I originally didn't mind what they did with Luke in The Last Jedi, and the reason I say that is I thought it was interesting to play with the idea of Luke Skywalker, this legend, this higher-than-life figure, being able to fail. But then
I could if they explained it in the series. Like maybe tell us something that happened that got him down this path, or maybe the temple turned out to be built on some old Sith temple instead, and he didn't have the ability to fight that dark energy. Something. But my God.
Realizes the error of his ways and then redeems his actions by the end. I liked him having to understand...
This is what happens when you're surrounded by people who say Yas Queen to you all the time. Yes, I'm talking about men. This is... They start to think that all men are Sims, and that is not the case. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'll simp with my girl, for my girl. But I won't take disrespect. No.
Understand the lesson that failure is the biggest teacher in order to get himself back on track. At face value, Luke's arc in The Last Jedi is actually pretty great, but the problem is, this is an arc that shouldn't, and realistically, would never exist for this character specifically. Yes, we can all make mistakes, yes, we're all vulnerable to a moment of weakness, we are human, but the leap Rian Johnson took with this idea with Luke was too much to digest for most people.
Yeah.
I like...
Again, because he was the embodiment of hope in the original trilogy.
The ideas posed with Luke in this movie, and in a vacuum they're poignant and thought-provoking, but the problem is you're doing this with a character that was the embodiment of hope. That even in the most dire circumstances could see the good in anyone.
Exactly.
The same person that saw the smallest shred of light in his father and was willing to face death in order to help redeem him. The same father that was responsible for the death of millions of people. The same father that helped create an oppressed galaxy which has had people living in fear and even blowing up planets. Rian Johnson expected us to believe that Luke could see the light and conflict in that person, but even in a fleeting moment would strike down his own nephew because he saw in Ben's dreams that Snoke had turned his heart, and Ben was eventually at some point going to do some bad stuff. This doesn't make sense. Remember when I said earlier that The Last Jedi doesn't care about if it breaks canon? That it doesn't respect what...
And no, Luke Skywalker is not the kind of person who would kill his nephew based off the future suffering he probably could and might do. It's not in his character.
Came before or what will come after. This is what I mean. Luke's arc could work well in The Last Jedi if the original trilogy didn't exist. Not to mention, how are we expected to believe that Luke would try and redeem Vader because he felt the conflict within him, that shred of light, but would think even for a moment to strike Ben down? Are you trying to tell me that Ben at this moment is completely lost to the dark side further than Vader ever was? No, and you can't say he was, because the entire sequel trilogy makes a very clear note that Kylo is conflicted, that he feels the pull to the light, so Luke switching on his lightsaber objectively makes no sense. How Luke can redeem Vader because he sensed conflict in him but tries to kill the character that these movies constantly tell you is conflicted makes no sense. This has been the most hotly debated topic with this movie, and I don't even think it should be. I think the conclusion here is pretty clear cut. I get we all have opinions, but people who try and make sense of this moment in The Last Jedi, please try and help me understand how this is supposed to make sense. You could pass this moment off as a brief failure of continuity and writing, but the problem is Luke's entire presence in this movie is built off this very moment. So you can't just brush it off as a weak moment in the writing. The entire film is built around this moment, and it doesn't make sense.
No.
Now, take Luke out of the equation. What about the rest of the movie? It's just not great.
No.
The First Order sit on the Resistance tail waiting for them to...
This is the slowest high-speed chase movie ever. And there's just a awful heist element to it with one of the most insufferable characters in Star Wars.
Run out of fuel for the entire movie until the Resistance can sneak off down to Crate and then create an epic climactic battle. Whilst all of this is going on, Finn and Rose head to Canto Bight, which has been clowned on endlessly by almost everyone who has seen this movie, so I'm not going to add to that. But despite how much I despise the Canto Bight sequence, I do like the idea of looking into war profiteering and the moral grey area of some characters in the galaxy, like DJ, played by Benicio del Toro, who definitely made some weird choices with the character in his...
I'm fine with that, but again, you hire Benicio del Toro, he's going to Benicio del Toro for you, okay? He's a really good actor. Not for Star Wars necessarily, but it is what it is, okay?
His performance. But the idea of these war profiteers getting rich selling weapons to the bad guys and the good, and that Finn should live free and not join a side, I find that interesting. Because this bleeds into Finn's arc across both movies. His motivations are always selfish. The only reason he helps the Resistance in The Force Awakens is because of Rey. He was happy to run away from the fight until she was captured. His first words in The Last Jedi are, "Where's Rey?" He tries to leave the fight again until he's stopped by Rose. And now with DJ, his conflict of running or joining continues. That is until he is on Crate, where he has to make a decision. He decides to sacrifice himself to reaffirm his choice to complete his arc. But yeah, they throw that out the window.
This is the most ridiculous scene, because right here, that would have killed both of them, okay? Absolutely would have killed both of them. One, how did she catch up to him? But this is retarded, okay? I'm not saying I wanted Finn to die, but considering they did nothing with his character in this movie or the next one, it would have been a great send-off to a character who they had nothing to do with, and they just fiddle-fucked around with him for 2 whole movies, because their whole Stormtrooper to good guy arc was over, but they didn't want to kill him off because, you know, black Star Wars character, sure. But Rose Tico, this whole starting right here and for the rest of this movie, retarded, okay? It's not about killing what we hate. It's about saving what we love. Sometimes you have to kill what you hate to save what you love, at least in a war situation, fuckwit. But considering she did, you know, this, where she could have killed both of them in that instance, so she could sneak a little, one of the most awkward on-screen kisses I've ever seen. Everything surrounding Rose Tico in this movie is awful. Again, don't go giving Kelly Marie Tran any hate, and I think everything that's happened to her to get her to leave social media is retarded and despicable. What are we doing?
Though, because Rose saves him and the awkward kiss happens, and then Finn is relegated to screaming out Rey in episode 9 and doing absolutely nothing else.
Exactly.
That's some mighty fine writing. Now, as for Rey, Kylo, and Snoke, I think these are some of the more enjoyable scenes in the movie, even though they are severely flawed and the whole subverting expectation thing comes to the forefront here.
And let's be honest, this isn't, I don't want him to die because of a race thing, okay? It's not because he's black. It's quite the contrary. I wanted them to do something meaningful with his character because all they did was dick around with him, okay? They needed him in the first movie to psych people out, to be like, oh, it might be a black Jedi. But it wasn't. They gave it to Rey. And then all he did was scream Rey for the next 2.25 movies. They wasted him, all the potential that they had with his story arc. Because again, they didn't have a through story, no through line. They needed to plan this from start to finish. I know I've said it 100 times, I'll say it 100 more. Finn was a compelling character in the first 3/4 of the first movie.
Yeah. Now, I do like the dynamic of Rey and Kylo, as Kylo, again, is the best part about the trilogy.
I do and I don't.
Having someone fuel the conflict he has definitely makes for the more interesting moments of these movies. I think him turning on Snoke and killing him just to become the Supreme Leader, though, just makes no sense. And is more of a middle finger to the audience for daring to have any interest in who Snoke was and what his backstory was. Remember the whole "your Snoke theory sucks" thing? How dare you theorize and speculate over the clearly set up to be
Again,
mysterious
fuck Ryan
character?
Johnson for that.
How dare you, you stupid person. Now, I do not buy for 1 second.
And no, just because it was wrong and not what you chose to do doesn't mean it sucks. A lot of them were much better choices. The idea of him being, Darth Sidious, Darth Plagueis. The idea of him being Darth Plagueis, the idea of him being Darth Jar Jar, but he got his mouth like cut off, and that's why he was weird looking. I heard a lot of them that he was actually just a weird manifestation of one of those. Even just one of the clones of Sidious, which he ended up being, was fine because they did similar in the books. It was very Doctor Doomy. With his life model decoys, but it was just
that when they cast Andy Serkis to play this character for The Force Awakens, that they were like, yeah, you're gonna die halfway through the second movie. Killing Snoke was a cool scene, but it's just dumb, and honestly is probably the key moment that completely obliterated this trilogy's continuity. Not to mention Kylo Ren's potential as a character. This scene should have taken place in Episode 9, and that's where Kylo should have killed Snoke as Ben, a full redemption just like his grandfather did.
agreed.
Sacrificing himself in his moment of redemption to destroy his master. This would have made way more sense, as the very cornerstone of Kylo Ren's character in these movies is his failure to live up to his grandfather. But then his redemption could have been the thing that made him most like Vader than anything bad he'd done. But no, we have to settle for a subversion of expectations because apparently that's better than logical writing. So because of this, they have to shoehorn Palpatine into Episode 9 and have Ben being thrown down a hole whilst Rey kills Palpatine, just...
With the power of two
The
lightsabers.
knock-on effect Snoke's death had on this trilogy can't be overstated. This was, and still is, the dumbest thing they did for the continuity of this trilogy. Now, I just realized putting this video
Also
together
that.
that I completely forgot about Holdo and the Holdo maneuver.
That was
This
the dumbest
character
thing.
was
Not the
inserted
Holdo
to
maneuver.
force conflict.
Visually, that was awesome. Storytelling-wise, and then just Holdo's whole experience, basically being a stand-in for Kathleen Kennedy anytime anyone asks her or tries to have input with anything, is telling.
To give Poe something to do in this movie. And the Holdo maneuver is a prime example of just because you
Cool
could
looking.
doesn't mean you should. They try to play this moment off as a 1 in a million maneuver, but what about this exactly is 1 in a million? You go into hyperspace in the direction of something. I'm not sure that's 1 in a million. I mean, we all know why they said that it was in The Rise of Skywalker, because it just opens up a massive plot hole regarding the entire franchise, so they have to play it off like it is 1 in a million. But we all know it's clearly not. That's just BS to just avoid a plot hole.
You're
But all
BS.
of that just adds to this movie disrespecting the fact that it takes place in a pre-established universe with its own set of rules that it just casually breaks for fun. Like, there are so
It
many
did,
things in
left
this
and
movie
right.
that just leave me scratching my head. Leia Poppins, I genuinely forgot how stupid that was. I don't think I could talk about this movie anymore.
Even the people I know who love this movie because they feel they have to because they're on that side of the aisle, and they're inside of that cult mentality that seems to be propagated, thought that Mary Poppins shit was retarded.
Last Jedi really has slid for me. I was never its #1 advocate or anything, but I can't believe I have soured on it this much since the last time I saw it. The forced comedy, the cheesy dialogue, the disrespect for what came before and what needs to come after, the derailment of what was a promising trilogy. This movie is just a perfect example of how not to make a middle entry in a trilogy. The Rise of Skywalker. I mean, how did we get here? I mean, I just spent the last 30 minutes talking about how we got here, but anyway. It is crazy seeing a trilogy that had so much promise just end up stooping so low. The Rise
I do like that we finally saw a yellow lightsaber on screen, but other than that,
of Skywalker was and still is a blueprint on how to not conclude a trilogy, how not to make a blockbuster film, how not to treat your audience. This movie genuinely acts like everyone watching it is stupid. This is a movie that is so fundamentally broken.
even though she fights like a blue lightsaber wielder, the Guardians, and her powers are to the level of a green wielder, which is consular, Jedi consular. So the fact that since she's strong with both of them, or does both of them, means she would land on yellow Jedi Sentinel. Makes sense, I guess. But I am happy to see a yellow lightsaber on screen.
Broken from
Purple's
top to
still my
bottom
favorite.
That I don't even know where to start.
Rey
I do think The Rise of
Skywalker.
Skywalker is a far worse movie than The Last Jedi,
Yes.
as The Last Jedi's issues are mainly based around
Yes.
continuity, not respecting the
But it only sucks that much because 8 derailed everything.
established universe, not adhering to the fact it's part of a trilogy and not its own separate thing. But The Rise of Skywalker, I think, fundamentally is just the worst written Star Wars film that's ever existed. You can make the argument that The Last Jedi is a good movie if you act like the rest of Star Wars does not exist.
Yes.
But The Rise of Skywalker is a bad movie
Yeah,
from
mostly.
every conceivable angle. Half of it is its own doing. The other half is they have to follow up a film that went against everything the trilogy was setting up. So it had to retcon some dumb decisions The Last Jedi made to try and gain back some level of cohesion and damage control. So although I am sympathetic to the fact this movie has to conclude what is now a completely broken trilogy because of The Last Jedi, it still doesn't excuse how lazy and desperate this movie was.
Agreed.
This movie is evidence that your movie doesn't need to be good to make $1 billion. Now, I held out a lot of hope that they were going to be able to save the sequel trilogy with The Rise of Skywalker. When I heard Palpatine laugh in that trailer, I was filled with levels of copium that should kill a man. It makes sense for Palpatine to come back to conclude the Skywalker saga, I used to say. Like, if I could get in a time machine and throw a brick at myself, I genuinely would. This is by far the most disconnected movie trilogy that has ever been put to screen. And this movie in general is just everything wrong with Hollywood. It's reliant on nostalgia to make up for straight up broken and contrived storytelling. It's lazy, it swings for the fences and misses by a mile and acts like it's a lot smarter than it is. Kind of like me. The answers for all of the questions
me too,
we had
buddy.
in this movie were blatant retcons of the disappointing answers that we got in The Last Jedi. Character motivations simply do not match up with the previous films. The MacGuffins. Oh my god. The frickin' MacGuffins. One more
So many
contrived Sith
MacGuffins.
dagger that
That
lines
one's
up with
the
the position
dumbest
of the
one.
Death Star ruins, and I will scream.
Not ruins. Not ruins. Something that's been sitting there for 20 years. 20 years doth not make a ruin. Okay, this is not national treasure. Okay. Shh. It's okay.
Things get to the point of parody too when things that haven't even been alluded to or foreshadowed in any way are all of a sudden a thing now and are played off like it's been the plan all along. Like, they had the nerve with this movie to act like Palpatine was the one pulling the strings behind the scenes the entire time when everyone knows that was not the case at all.
Yeah.
Like, who are you fooling, Disney? Rey is a Palpatine now, and that's been the plan all along too.
That one definitely was not. No. I can see how they can play it off. Okay, because the way J.J. Abrams set it up, again, his mystery box shit, he had her fighting with the power, like with the stance and all that of Palpatine, which was horrible, like old man, like fighting stance. And had, for no reason at all, Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan's voice saying, Rey, during one of the scenes in the first, in Rise of, Force Awakens. So pretty. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, nobody was buying that when the movie came out. No one's buying it now. Daisy Ridley literally came out and said that they had no idea who Rey's parents were the entire time because it kept changing.
Rey's secret from the beginning. Did you know about the parentage? Like, tell me about that journey of when you found out.
No. At the beginning, there was toying with like an Obi-Wan connection, and then it really went, there were like different versions, and then it really went to that she was no one. And then it came to episode 9, and JJ pitched me the film and was like, oh yeah, Palpatine's granddaddy. And I was like, awesome. And then 2 weeks later, he was like, oh, we're not sure. So it kept changing. So then even I was filming, and I wasn't sure what the answer was going to be.
Like, imagine planning out a trilogy that can make you billions and literally be the biggest thing in Hollywood, and you don't even have a plan for where the freaking main character's going to go.
Yeah.
You just do it off the cuff, depending on what each specific filmmaker wants, and don't rein them in the second things start not making sense. How the main character in a trilogy, how their lineage can change multiple times between 3 movies is insane. Like, the level of
That was too
incompetence
much.
it had to take for them to blow the potential of this trilogy continues to astound me. You could actually tell how done the cast was with this
And I can see her doing that maneuver on a regular pilot, but for a Jedi or a Sith pilot, no. No.
movie during the press tour.
They fly now. He forgot. He forgot. But what if that was the first time they used them? They're using them since the Clone Wars.
Like, they didn't even try to hide that they
See,
knew
and
them.
I love that he at least seemed like an actual fan. Okay.
Movie was shit. Now, they didn't do the Dakota Johnson, Madam Web technique of straight up saying it was dog shit, but let's be real.
Yeah.
Just watch the interviews. They said it without saying it. And a year after The Rise of Skywalker's release, John
It looked like anyone who worked in the MCU when asked what they thought about Brie Larson. Oh, shit. Hold on.
and then having no idea what without saying it. And a year after The Rise of Skywalker's release, John Boyega actually called Disney out for hiring him to check a box and then having no idea what to do with him.
And then completely flipped on this and started blaming the fans about, actually, right after he made this video.
And I'm so glad that he did that because
Movie
they
Overload, not John
completely
Boyega.
wasted both him as an actor and the character.
Like right after Movie Overlord made this, John Boyega started saying that it was the fans' fault. Which is funny because all the fans that hated the movies stood by him because they thought he should have been the main character, which would have completely negated his own argument. But again, it's not on the fans. It's on Disney and Kathleen Kennedy and Bob Iger. Not Bob Chapek, but Bob Iger.
Character. Both had crazy potential. Finn had the potential to be one of the standout characters in this trilogy, and they completely tossed him to the side. Now, Disney are notorious for pandering and checking boxes when it suits them, and then dropping those
Yes, they are. But they will only... This is when they tested the waters, okay? Because this series sucked. But then they started making things that they knew were going to be bad, and they made them anyway. And then they just put a minority character in the lead role so they could shield them, so the minority character could shield them from all all negativity. Like, any comment on the movie at that point was a comment on the minority that they picked for the main character and not on the shitty writing, shitty character development, horrible, cheap props and sets on very expensive movies. It's ridiculous how cheap Star Wars has looked in the last few projects and how much money they spent to look that cheap. It's because of reshoots and just, God, hiring the worst people to do almost all of this.
morals when it comes to making money with their marketing campaigns. Remember when they shrunk down Finn on Chinese posters
Yeah.
and they covered...
They shrunk Finn. Like, where is he? I know he's on here somewhere. There he is. There you are, little guy. They moved him all the way from here to here, moved the Millennium Falcon into prominence, completely throwing off the flow of the poster, by the way. And just like this, that's the most horrible. That's not even the mask from the movie. And they put it over Chadwick Boseman's face because they didn't want to advertise a black main character in China. Look, if you don't hold true across the line in all countries, and that you can be bought to care about minorities less, Disney, Hollywood, all of you, then you don't stand for anything, okay? You just want to put a finger in the eye of the Christian conservatives that you feel have oppressed you. That's you, white lady, not you, whatever people you claim to stand for, okay? Sorry, this is me standing up against bored, overprivileged, upper middle, and upper class white liberals, specifically women. What the hell? You stand for nothing. Nothing. And this poster sucks. I mean, look, the side view's much better. This looks like a B movie or a porn. And then moving my boy John Boyega down here to the corner. It's just, come on. Anyway, I'm done. Rant over.
Black Panther's skin on Chinese posters. Yeah, a really weird way of saying you care. Good job, Disney. And I love the fact that John Boyega didn't care and he called Disney out on this shit. Actually, super based.
Most people gave him mad props for this. But again, until his comments that happened after, around the time that this video came out, maybe a little after.
They also went out of their way to actually have our new trio on screen together straight off the bat. Yeah, it only took until the last movie of a trilogy to have the three main characters together. I will say though, I did like the banter they shared, as it's clear the actors actually do have chemistry, but it's not hard to read between the lines that they're trying to make up for the lost time with the trio being separated. They also pushed Hux to the side because he went from at least somewhat intimidating to a little bitch in The Last Jedi, and brought in Richard E. Grant to actually play a convincing First Order general. Like, this guy was cool. He should have been there the whole time. Yeah. This movie does play with some cool ideas despite how bad it is. I think the dyad idea that they followed up with from The Last Jedi was actually pretty great, but ultimately ends up being a waste of potential. There's those three words again. Like I said, I do like Rey and Kylo as a complicated duo, and I don't mean the Reylo shit. Like, that is just weird.
Agreed.
Like, what is wrong with you people? I mean the genuine idea of a dyad and what they can do with it. It's cool, it's fresh, it's new. I like it.
I don't like that Hollywood doesn't understand that two people can have a strong, loving bond without being gay. Like, it's okay. Like, a guy and a girl can be like this close without being a love interest. Okay, you can have a mutual respect for someone you've been through a lot with. It's kind of like we saw with Malcolm Reynolds and Zoe in Firefly and the movie Serenity that followed it. They've been through a lot. They were war buddies, and they had that strong bond, but it was never anything more than that. They just respected each other. They had a fondness for each other, but it wasn't anything romantical. They don't even understand this between men and women. These days, they don't even understand it between, the same sex. You can have that strong bond, band of brother shit, and not want to bump uglies. Like, come on. I've missed that saying. I'm bringing it back. Bump uglies.
They played around with some cool ideas with it here. Their fight on Kijimi was actually visually interesting as a result, and expanded on the Skype calls they had in The Last Jedi. And Rey handing Ben the lightsaber to fight off the Knights of Ren was actually pretty cool. I know some people like to say this kind of stuff opens up plot holes, but to be honest, as these two are a dyad, which is super, super rare, I don't see this as being a problem. I really liked the dyad idea. I just think it was a little undercooked, and they didn't do enough with it. I also think the style and aesthetic...
Agreed, but that's mostly because they were trying to do so much in this movie that they didn't have time to flesh out ideas. They just kind of threw shit at you and hoped you liked it.
The aesthetic of Exegol is pretty great. It's just a
like
shame
German
it only
people.
exists because Disney got desperate and deployed the Palpatine. I also really liked the scene where Ben's redemption finally comes, but I don't even want to know how much money they had to throw at Harrison Ford to get him to come in for an afternoon of work. Oh, and they also gave Chewie his medal. Finally. 10 out of 10 masterpiece. Now, positives aside,
that was nice,
I know there wasn't
but
many,
again.
but positives aside regardless. So Kylo throughout this movie knows Rey is a Palpatine, which again doesn't make sense because Kylo said her parents were a nobody, which we now know thanks to Daisy Ridley that actually was the plan when The Last Jedi came out. There wasn't any underlying con here from Kylo. He was telling the truth. Her parents were a nobody.
Which, fuck Ryan Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy for that, okay? You don't just you become this powerful in the Star Wars universe just because you exist. I mean, unless both your parents were Jedi or whatever, or unless you're a Skywalker or a Palpatine, or unless you're, what's it called? Where you get it from your parents, hereditary. If it's hereditary, if it's in the family lineage, all that's
That was the situation. But because subverting expectations didn't go well with Star Wars fans, we're retroactively supposed to believe Kylo was telling a big porky pie here, a big old lie, when he wasn't. They just changed direction again between movies. Now, when you actually stop to think about literally anything in this movie, it just falls apart. For example, how did Palpatine have a fleet that big just sitting away on Exegol?
And again, it's not ruins, it's wreckage.
All this time, when the previous movie made it clear that the First Order relies on warmongers to create their weaponry. But we're supposed to believe that Palpatine has made the biggest fleet the galaxy has ever seen, with planet-destroying tech on every ship, and he's done it all in secret.
And he's got
Literally
people
makes no
manning
sense.
these ships.
Where do those
and he
resources
feeds
come
them,
from?
so
Also,
on and so forth.
how were there any Death Star remains at all, given it was completely pulverized in Return of the Jedi? How did Rey not know Chewie wasn't on the transport she blew up, but somehow knows he's on the Star Destroyer later in Kijimi?
Yeah.
How did Lando manage to convince seemingly everyone in the galaxy to join the fight on Exegol when their distress signal in The Last Jedi was completely ignored? Like, the second you give anything in this movie any thought at all, you quickly realize it totally falls apart. Like, it's clear they were just making shit up as they went, and they clearly didn't even try. They cut corners, they took the easy way out. Half of it was definitely the result of The Last Jedi derailing the trilogy and them desperately scrambling to course correct. Which, I mean, technically is still their fault because they wouldn't tell Rian Johnson no and ticked off everything that movie did. And the other half of the equation is they were just trying to wrap this movie up and tried their best to get fans back on board with contrived writing, on-the-nose nods at the audience, and desperate nostalgia attempts. Oh yeah, Finn is force sensitive now, by the way, apparently, for reasons I can't explain because the movie didn't, and this...
That should have been done in the 8th movie, and then him, be expanded upon and actually mentioned and shown in episode 9. But they didn't, because Kathleen Kennedy hired Rian Johnson for the second movie in a trilogy.
Whatever. Just whatever. Sure, why not? And then, of course, the movie ends on the cringiest moment in the entire franchise.
Rey Skywalker.
And that's the end of the Skywalker saga.
Gonna live on Tatooine with an Aunt Beru's corpse.
Now, I, of course, can't finish this video without talking about Rey in this movie. She is so OP, it's not even funny.
She is.
I guess they try and justify her power level because she's a Palpatine now.
Yes.
But the power scaling in this trilogy hasn't made sense the entire time. The fact that Rey single-handedly takes down Palpatine by sending his Force lightning
I've
back
got
on
2
him makes no
lightsabers.
sense, even if she does have all the power of the Jedi, which is just... what? This is the same thing that happened to Palpatine in Revenge of the Sith. He could just stop using Force lightning so she can't send it back on him, but no, he just keeps doing it until he dies, because reasons. At least in Revenge of the Sith, you could argue that Palpatine was doing it to force Anakin's hand to get him to finally turn, because Anakin needs Palpatine alive. But here, what is the reason? And why the hell would you not have been involved in this fight? Why would you flick him down a hole not to be seen until after Palpatine is dead? This is the last Skywalker. But in the writer's mind, I guess, why have Vader's grandson who idolized Vader help kill Palpatine just like his grandfather did to complete his arc in the trilogy and run a clear writing parallel when you can just throw him down a hole?
And completely destroys the whole prophecy of Anakin Skywalker in the process, which is the big reason why people hated episode 9, at least the people who care about the lore.
And not do anything. Kylo's goal this entire trilogy was to live up to his grandfather, and went down a dark path to pursue that and kept failing. When he turns good, that's when you make him succeed, by taking out Palpatine, just like Vader did. It was right there in front of you, and you didn't do it. So instead of logical writing happening, they take him out of the picture so Rey can have the hero moment. That is, until he comes back conveniently when it's over to just bring Rey back to life so he can die. Like, was Adam Driver sleeping with J.J. Abrams' wife throughout filming or something? Like, Ben got shafted in this ending. I hated this. This is the best character in the trilogy by a mile, and he just gets ditched off to the side when it comes to fighting Palpatine. The main thing that would have made sense for closure on the character. Not to mention, Rey goes from random scavenger to killing Palpatine in 1 year. That's
Luke didn't even kill
That is
Palpatine.
insane. Palpatine is like the most powerful Force user we've seen, and Rey kills him after using the Force for a year. Like, what are they doing? Now, on a slightly more positive note, I will say I think they handled Leia's death as well as they possibly could.
That I will give them. Okay, they did a great service to Carrie Fisher in this. They did right by her, especially since they didn't kill her off in the movie, which was her last one that she actually filmed anything for. It was good to see Leia using Force powers. It was good to see her training people. But it would have been nice to get any backstory as to who the fuck trained her.
When an actor so integral passes away before filming, there's only so much you can really do if you're not recasting. The fact they made anything work at all, I think, deserves some level of praise. But watching through the movie, it is very clear that they had to make compromises.
And Rey should have made a lightsaber between the 8th and 9th movie. Just saying.
As with Leia in this movie, because a lot of things just don't really make sense. I do like that they at least tried to tie her death into Kylo's redemption in a way, and I don't really dock points for the Leia scenes not working out the best in this movie. They were kind of caught between a rock and a hard place with this, and they did what they could. Overall, though, I think The Rise of Skywalker is just a bad movie through and through, with some decent moments, but ultimately, it's a symptom of The Last Jedi. It's torn between damage control and trying to wrap up the story, and it's a mess. It was a
Also, Rey's take on the double-bladed lightsaber was really stupid.
desperate attempt to get fans back on board, and unfortunately, a lot of people fell for it, including me. This film made $1 billion. I saw the movie in theaters twice. Yes, I hope that I step on Lego 2 for my treachery. What I can say with confidence, though, is I don't think I'll ever watch this movie again, or any of the sequels for that matter, because it just gets more and more depressing seeing the potential of this trilogy just being completely wasted. And life is honestly better when you pretend that these movies never even happened. So, revisiting the Star Wars sequels after all this time was definitely an experience. I'm glad I finally got to go into detail on this movies on the channel.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. Look, in a vacuum, Force Awakens was a decent enough movie to bring the franchise back in new hands. But let's face it, especially when it comes to Disney Plus shows, are you really surprised by the lack of quality? I mean, think of the quality of things that were on the Disney Channel in the 90s and 2000s. Okay? That's basically, it feels like those people evolved, quote unquote, into the writers for Disney Plus now that they're big people and not just nepotism hires, but they're also still nepotism hires. But yeah, I've always known that Disney buying Star Wars would have been bad. I would hope that since they were such a big power, they would have gotten, some real writers to help them make the monies for their purchase, because they wanted to get the $4 billion back. And they haven't at all. They haven't. My God, they still haven't got the money back from the purchase of Lucasfilm, LucasArts, and such. But my goal is I'm gonna do some of these Star Wars lore videos. I think there's discussions on some of the legacy books, so on and so forth. But I'm going to do a few follow-alongs with some of that. And then my goal is, by the end of this, I will have a video on either how to save Star Wars or how to reboot Disney Star Wars. Not all of Star Wars, but Disney Star Wars. I think as it is now, the prequels and the original trilogy and Clone Wars should be untouched. I've seen that they're thinking about bringing Star Killer, or whatever his good guy name is, from Force Unleashed. I think that could be cool, especially if you have him in something with Ahsoka. Just not Rosario Dawson's Ahsoka. She looks the part 100%, but she's far too stoic, unless she's been in the World Between Worlds for a very long time. But we'll see. But, and like I said, I'll either do fixing Star Wars, where to go from here, or more than likely how I would reboot the Disney section of Star Wars. And that video will come after a few lore dives. I'll get into that somewhere around mid-February, probably, is when I'll put that actual breakdown. But I will do one every weekend, one of the lore things in the meantime. But yeah, that's what I'm going to be working on over the course of the next couple months. I will get back into the gaming side of things. I don't know why. Like, there are some games that'll just grab me and I want to start and finish it all the way through. But then there's some that like kind of grab me for a little bit and then I just don't want to. I don't know what it is. I need to get better about that. And like I said, if I can get more people on my Twitch side of things, or even on Kick, then I will definitely do that. But in the meantime, guys, thanks for stopping by. This is the second video I've done today. If you want to check out something I did for my one of 3 or 4 diehard fans that I currently have. I have other people pop in and out and a lot of views on these videos, but I've got those 3 or 4 people who are here for just about every show. I appreciate them, so I did that one for them specifically. It was, I guess, one of the AI-generated tech tone videos. Go ahead and watch that. And as always, drop a like on whatever streaming service you're watching this on. Please, if you have the means, follow me on Rumble so I can start streaming the political side of things over there. And guys, I just appreciate the hell out of you. I'm not signing off the way I said I was going to, Shapeshifter, but yeah, thanks very much. It means a lot.